They called him the Silent Death. Lorenzo Moretti didn't need to shout to run the criminal underworld of Chicago. He didn't even need to speak. Deaf since a childhood bombing took his hearing, he ruled through fear, vibration, and absolute brutality. No one looked him in the eye. No one dared to breathe wrong in his presence. Until a rainy Tuesday night in November, when a single mother's worst nightmare came true. Her toddler didn't just walk up to the most dangerous man in America, she did the unthinkable. What happened next didn't result in a funeral. It started a war. This is the story of the Silent King and the noise that changed everything. The rain outside Lavelle's, the most exclusive Italian restaurant on the Gold Coast, was relentless. It battered the bulletproof glass windows, but inside the silence was heavy enough to crush a man's lungs. The entire restaurant had been cleared out. It was 8:00 p.m. prime time, yet 60 tables stood empty. The staff lined the back wall, hands clasped behind their backs, eyes fixed on their shoes. The air smelled of expensive truffle oil and terrified sweat. There was only one diner. Lorenzo Moretti sat at table 1, the spot with the clear view of the entrance and the kitchen. He was 32, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the staff's combined annual salaries. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing the jagged, pale scar that ran from his left ear down to his jawline, a souvenir from the car bomb that had killed his father and taken Lorenzo's hearing 20 years ago. He cut into his ossobuco with surgical precision. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. Through the vibrations in the floorboards, he knew exactly where his 4 bodyguards were standing. He knew the chef was trembling in the kitchen. Lorenzo lived in a world of absolute silence. He couldn't hear the rain. He couldn't hear the sirens in the distance. And he definitely couldn't hear the stifled sob of Clara, the new waitress, who was hiding behind the service station. Clara Miller was 24 with tired eyes and a uniform that was slightly too big. She shouldn't have been here. She was supposed to be the dishwasher, but the floor manager, a cruel man named Giuseppe, had forced her to wait tables tonight because the regular staff was too nervous to serve Moretti. But Clara had a secret problem, a problem that was currently sleeping in a makeshift crib made of tablecloths in the dry storage pantry behind the kitchen. Her babysitter had bailed. Her abusive ex-boyfriend, a low-level dealer named Rick, was stalking her apartment. She had nowhere else to go. So she had smuggled her 18-month-old daughter Lily into the restaurant. "Please sleep," Clara prayed, watching the monitors. "Just stay asleep for 1 more hour." Lorenzo signaled for wine. He didn't speak. He just tapped the rim of the crystal glass once. The sound of the tap was sharp, but Lorenzo only felt the glass verify the impact. His head of security, a mountain of a man named Marco, stepped forward and snapped his fingers at Clara. "The wine!" Marco hissed. "Now, and don't look at his scar." Clara's hands shook as she grabbed the bottle of 1990 Barolo. She walked toward table 1. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She poured the wine. Not a drop spilled. Lorenzo watched the red liquid fill the glass. Then he looked up. His eyes were the color of steel cold and dead. He read lips fluently in 3 languages. He saw the waitress whisper, "Thank you, sir," even though no sound came out. He nodded once. A dismissal. Clara turned to leave, her knees weak with relief. She had done it. She had survived the encounter. And then she felt the vibration. It wasn't a guard moving. It was a small, stumbling thud. Clara froze. The blood drained from her face. Lorenzo felt it too. A different vibration, light, irregular. Not the heavy step of a hit man, but something tiny. He lowered his fork. His hand drifted beneath his jacket, gripping the handle of his customized 1911 pistol. His guards drew their weapons instantly, aiming at the shadows near the kitchen. "Show yourself!" Marco roared. From the shadows a figure emerged. It wasn't an assassin. It was Lily. She had woken up. She had climbed out of the laundry basket. She was wearing a pink onesie with a cartoon bunny on it, and she was clutching a dirty pacifier. She had curly blonde hair and eyes that were too big for her face. Clara stopped breathing. She wanted to scream, to run, but fear paralyzed her. This was the Mafia code. No witnesses, no interruptions, no exceptions. Lily saw the men with guns. Most children would cry. But Lily had grown up in chaos. She was used to shouting. She ignored the guards. Her eyes locked onto the man sitting alone. The man who looked lonely. Lorenzo didn't shoot. He watched the small creature toddle toward him. He saw Marco's finger tightening on the trigger. Lorenzo raised a hand, a sharp cutting motion. "Stand down." The guards lowered their guns, confused. Lily walked right up to table 1. She was barely taller than the table leg. She looked up at Lorenzo. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every staff member held their breath. Clara was weeping silently, tears streaming down her face, preparing to beg for her daughter's life. Then Lily did the unthinkable. She reached up, grabbed the edge of Lorenzo's expensive tablecloth, and pulled herself up. She wobbled, then placed her small, chubby hand directly onto Lorenzo's knee. She stared at him, then pointed a tiny finger at his plate. Lorenzo looked down at the child. For 20 years, people looked at him with terror, hatred, or greed. No one had looked at him with curiosity. Lily dropped her pacifier. It hit the floor. She looked at it, then back at Lorenzo. She raised her arms up, the universal sign for pick me up. The guards gasped. Marco stepped forward. "Boss, I'll handle this." Lorenzo turned his head. He gave Marco a look so lethal it could have frozen hell over. Marco stepped back. Slowly, terrifyingly, Lorenzo Moretti, the butcher of Chicago, uncrossed his legs. He leaned down. His large, scarred hands, which had strangled men twice his size, hovered over the child. He gripped her under the arms. He lifted her up. He set her on his lap. Lily giggled. The vibration of it went through his chest. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. A pure, uncorrupted sound wave. She reached out and touched his scar. Her small fingers traced the jagged line of dead skin. Clara couldn't take it anymore. She burst forward, falling to her knees 5 feet away. "Please!" she screamed, though she knew he couldn't hear. "Please don't hurt her. She's a baby. Take me instead. Please!" Lorenzo watched Clara's lips. "Please don't hurt, baby." He looked at the woman on her knees. He looked at the baby on his lap, who was now reaching for his wine glass. Lorenzo gently moved the wine glass away. Then he picked up a piece of bread, dipped it in the rich sauce, and held it out to the child. Lily took a bite. The monster was feeding the mouse. The tension in the room shifted from terror to utter confusion. Lorenzo Moretti was feeding a toddler bread dipped in ossobuco sauce. The most feared man in the city, the man who had supposedly burned down a warehouse with his rivals inside last month, was currently wiping sauce off a baby's chin with a silk napkin worth $200. Clara was shaking so hard, her teeth chattered. She stayed on her knees, head bowed, waiting for the snap of the neck, the gunshot, the end. Lorenzo looked at the woman. He tapped the table twice, hard. Clara looked up, tears blurring her vision. Lorenzo signed something. His movements were fluid, sharp, and aggressive. Marco the bodyguard sighed and translated. "The boss asks, is she yours?" Clara nodded frantically. Yes, she's mine. I'm so sorry. I didn't have a sitter. I couldn't leave her alone. Please, I'll leave. I'll never come back." Lorenzo studied her face. He was reading more than lips. He was reading micro-expressions. He saw the bruising on her forearm, poorly covered by makeup. He saw the desperation in her posture. He recognized the look of a hunted animal. He saw it every time he looked in the mirror. He looked back at Lily. The baby was content, swinging her legs, leaning back against his chest, as if he were a favorite uncle, not a mass murderer. The vibration of her small body against his was grounding. It cut through the static in his head. Lorenzo tapped Marco's arm and signed again. "The boss says," Marco translated his voice monotone, "Why is she here? Where is the father?" Clara hesitated. Lying to a Mafia don was a death sentence. He's not around. He's dangerous. I'm hiding from him. That's why I had to bring her. I couldn't risk him finding her at a sitter's." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. He took the piece of bread from Lily's hand as she finished it. He lifted the child up again. Clara flinched, reaching out her arms. But Lorenzo didn't throw the child. He stood up. He walked around the table, holding Lily like a football tucked against his side. He walked over to Clara. He crouched down, ruining the crease in his trousers. He was now eye level with the waitress. He placed Lily gently into Clara's arms. Lily immediately started crying, reaching back toward Lorenzo. She wanted the nice man with the warm suit and the tasty bread. Lorenzo reached into his inner pocket. The guards tensed. The staff flinched. He pulled out a money clip. It was thick with $100 bills. He didn't count it. He simply tossed the entire stack onto Clara's lap. It was easily $5,000. Then he pulled out a small black business card with a singular gold crest on it. He tucked it into Lily's onesie pocket. He stood up, towering over them. He signed to Marco. "Get them a car," Marco said, looking shocked. "Take them home. Make sure no one follows them." Lorenzo turned his back on them and returned to his table. He sat down. He picked up his fork. The meal was over, but he wasn't leaving yet. Clara stared at the money, then at the man's back. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." 2 guards hoisted her up and escorted her out the back door to a waiting black SUV. As the door closed, Giuseppe, the restaurant manager, came rushing out from the kitchen, sweating profusely. He approached Lorenzo's table, wringing his hands. "Mr. Moretti, Don Lorenzo, I am humiliated, mortified. That filth, that girl. She will be fired immediately. I will make sure she never works in this city again. I didn't know the brat was there. I swear on my mother's grave." Lorenzo stopped chewing. He slowly turned his head to look at Giuseppe. The look was so vacant, so devoid of humanity, that Giuseppe stopped talking mid-sentence. Lorenzo raised one finger. Marco stepped in, grabbing Giuseppe by the collar and dragging him close. "The boss says," Marco whispered into the manager's ear, "if you fire her, or if she loses her job for any reason, we will burn this restaurant to the ground with you inside it." Giuseppe turned pale green. Understood. She stays. Promotion. Yes. Lorenzo went back to his meal. Clara woke up in her small, drafty apartment. She looked at the stack of cash on her nightstand. It wasn't a dream. She had paid her back rent instantly. She had bought groceries. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't panicking about electricity. She looked at the black card Lorenzo had put in Lily's pocket. It had no phone number, just an address in Lake Forest, the most expensive neighborhood in Illinois. Why, she wondered. Why did he let us live? Suddenly a loud banging on her door shattered the peace. "Clara, open the damn door. I know you're in there." It was Rick, her ex. Clara grabbed Lily and ran to the bathroom, locking the flimsy door. She dialed 911, but she knew they wouldn't come in time. Rick had friends on the force. That was why she could never escape. The front door splintered. Heavy boots stomped into the living room. "Where are you, you little witch? You think you can hide my kid from me?" Clara covered Lily's mouth, tears streaming down her face. But then the noises in the living room changed. "Hey, who are you?" Rick shouted. "Get the hell out of my—" Thud, a sickening crack, the sound of a body hitting the floor hard, then total silence. Clara held her breath. Was Rick dead, or was he playing a game? Footsteps approached the bathroom door. Slow, deliberate. Knock. Knock. A piece of paper slid under the door. Clara slowly reached down and picked it up. It was a note written in elegant, sharp handwriting. "Pack your things. You are not safe here. The car is waiting outside. LM." Clara opened the door. Rick was gone. The carpet had been cleaned, but standing in her living room was Marco the giant from the restaurant. "Mrs. Miller," Marco said, looking uncomfortable holding a diaper bag. "The boss insists you're coming with us." "To where?" Clara asked, clutching Lily. "To the fortress," Marco said. "He needs a housekeeper, and apparently he needs a noise he can tolerate." The Moretti estate wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum of marble and mahogany, located on a cliff overlooking Lake Michigan. When the iron gates closed behind the SUV, Clara felt a heavy finality settle in her chest. She was safe from Rick, yes. But she had traded a wolf for a dragon. Marco led her and Lily inside. The house was magnificent, filled with Renaissance art and velvet drapes, but it was disturbingly quiet. There was no background music, no television hum. The staff maids, cooks, guards moved like ghosts. They wore soft-soled shoes. They communicated in swift hand signals. Sound was unnecessary here. It was waste. "Your room," Marco said, opening a set of double doors on the second floor. It was a suite larger than Clara's entire apartment. A crib made of cherry wood stood in the corner filled with plush toys. The windows were bulletproof glass. "Why is he doing this?" Clara asked, clutching Lily, who was asleep on her shoulder. "I'm nobody. I'm a waitress." Marco looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The boss values purity. In our world, everyone wants something. They lie. They scream. Your daughter didn't want anything from him. She just wanted to share her bread. That is a debt, and Lorenzo Moretti always pays his debts." Marco left. For 3 days, Clara didn't see Lorenzo. She and Lily existed in the gilded cage. She helped the head housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, with the laundry, though the older woman insisted she didn't need to work. Clara needed to work. Idleness made her think of Rick of the gun in the restaurant of the fear. On the 4th afternoon, the silence broke. Clara was in the grand library, dusting books while Lily played on the Persian rug. Lily found a heavy crystal paperweight and banged it against the hardwood floor. Thud. 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 The rhythmic banging echoed in the silent house. Clara gasped and rushed to stop her. "No, Lily, shh, the boss is working. Let her." Clara spun around. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit armor today. He wore a black cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He looked younger, less like a monument, and more like a man. He was looking at Lily, not Clara. He walked into the room. He didn't sign to a translator. Marco wasn't there. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket and wrote something, handing it to Clara. "She is making vibrations. She is testing the floor." Clara read the note, trembling. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. Lorenzo shook his head. He sat down on the floor. The godfather of Chicago sitting cross-legged on a rug. He placed his palm flat against the wood. He nodded to Lily. Lily grinned, revealing her few teeth. She slammed the paperweight down again. Thud. Lorenzo closed his eyes, feeling the shockwave travel through the wood and into his hand. It was his connection to the world tactile sound. He opened his eyes and looked at Lily. He slapped his hand against the floor hard. Slap. Lily squealed and hit the floor back. Thud. Slap. Thud. It became a game. A conversation without words. A rhythm of heavy bass notes thumping through the library. For the first time in days, the cold, dead look in Lorenzo's eyes thawed. A corner of his mouth twitched upward. Clara watched, mesmerized. She saw the scar on his neck ripple as he moved. She realized suddenly that his silence wasn't empty. It was full of things he couldn't say. Lorenzo stopped. He looked up at Clara. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. He motioned for her to sit. She sat on the edge of the rug. Lorenzo pointed to his chest. He made a sign, a flat hand, tapping his chest twice. "Moretti." He pointed to Clara. "Clara," she whispered, then realized he needed to see it. She enunciated clearly. "Clara." He nodded. He pointed to Lily. "Lily." Lorenzo tried to shape the word with his mouth, but no sound came out. He frowned. Instead, he made a shape with his hands, fingers pinched together, blooming open like a flower. "Lily." He was giving her a sign name. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes." She nodded. "That's beautiful." The moment was shattered by a flashing red light on the wall. The silent alarm. Lorenzo's face hardened instantly. The softness vanished. He was the killer again. He stood up, fluid and lethal moving, between the women and the door. He checked his phone, which was vibrating violently. He turned to Clara, his eyes wide with urgency. He signed one word, sharp and terrifying. "Hide." The alarm wasn't an attack. It was a breach of protocol at the gate. Marco stormed into the library, seconds later, weapon drawn, but lowered it when he saw Lorenzo. He signed rapidly. "It's not a hit squad. It's the police. Detective Vance. He has a warrant for Clara Miller." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He signaled stall them. He turned to Clara. She was pale, clutching Lily. "Is it Rick?" she asked. "Did he send them?" Lorenzo wrote on his pad. "Stay here. Do not make a sound." He left the room. Clara crept to the window, peering through the heavy drapes. Down in the driveway, 2 police cruisers were parked. A man in a cheap trench coat, Detective Vance, was arguing with Marco. Vance was Rick's cousin. Clara knew him. He was the one who lost her domestic violence reports. Lorenzo stepped out of the front door. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like royalty. He walked down the stone steps. Vance shouted something, waving a paper. Lorenzo didn't react to the shouting. He simply stared at Vance's lips. Vance looked unsettled by the lack of reaction. He stepped closer, aggressive. "I know she's in there, Moretti. That's kidnapping. I'm going in." Vance put his hand on his holster. In a blur of motion, Marco and 2 other guards had weapons raised, but Lorenzo raised a hand to stop them. Lorenzo reached into his jacket. Vance flinched. Lorenzo pulled out a phone. He typed a number and held it out to Vance. It was a video call. Vance looked at the screen. His face went white. On the screen was the chief of police, Vance's boss, sitting in his office. But behind the chief stood one of Lorenzo's lawyers. Vance listened to the phone for 10 seconds. He swallowed hard. He looked at Lorenzo with pure hatred, then backed away. "This isn't over," Vance spat. He got in his car and sped away. Lorenzo watched them leave. He didn't look triumphant. He looked worried. That night the house was tense. The playful atmosphere of the library was gone. Clara couldn't sleep. She left Lily in the crib and wandered down to the kitchen for water. She saw a light on in the study. The door was ajar. Lorenzo was sitting at his desk, his back to her. He was watching a monitor. Clara stepped closer. She shouldn't be snooping, but she needed to understand the man who held her life in his hands. On the screen was surveillance footage. It was grainy, black and white. It showed the alley behind Lavelle's restaurant from the night they met. Lorenzo was watching the footage of Rick. Rick wasn't dead. The footage showed Rick stumbling out of the back of the restaurant, bloodied but alive, being helped into a black sedan. The sedan didn't belong to the police. It had a crest on the door, a crest of a serpent eating its tail. The Rossi crime family. Lorenzo felt the vibration of Clara's footsteps. He spun around, his hand instinctively going for the gun on the desk. Seeing it was her, he relaxed, but he quickly turned off the monitor. He looked at her, his eyes weary. "He's alive," Clara whispered. "Rick is alive." Lorenzo nodded. He didn't try to hide it. "And he's with them?" she asked. Lorenzo motioned for her to come closer. He took a pen and paper. "Rick sold you," he wrote. "He didn't just want you back. He owed money to the Rossi family. He traded your location to them because he knows I have you. He made you a target to clear his debt." Clara felt sick. Why am I a target? I'm nothing." Lorenzo looked at her for a long time. He stood up and walked around the desk. He stood inches from her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, but his touch was gentle. He wrote, "Because you are the first thing in 20 years that I have allowed inside my walls. They think you are my weakness." "Am I?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Am I a weakness?" Lorenzo looked at her lips. He dropped the pen. He took her face in his hands. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. He didn't kiss her. He just breathed with her. In the silence, the connection was louder than a scream. He pulled back and signed one word which Clara now understood. "No." He picked up the pen again. "You are not the weakness. You are the reason I am going to war." 2 weeks later, the war arrived. It didn't happen at the mansion. Lorenzo was too smart for that. The fortress was impenetrable. It happened on the road. Lily had a high fever. The estate doctor was away, and the fever spiked to 104. Clara was frantic. Lorenzo made the call they would go to the private pediatric clinic in the city. It was a convoy. 3 armored SUVs. Lorenzo, Clara, and Lily were in the middle vehicle. Clara held Lily in the back seat. Lorenzo sat next to her, his eyes scanning the horizon, his body tense as a coiled spring. He held Clara's hand, his grip tight. They were on the highway, crossing the bridge back toward the city. Lorenzo suddenly let go of her hand. He sat up straight. He felt it before it happened. A vibration in the chassis of the car. An explosion. Boom! The lead SUV 50 yards ahead erupted into a fireball. It flipped into the air, crashing down and blocking the road. "Ambush!" Marco screamed from the driver's seat. "Get down!" Clara threw herself over Lily. Lorenzo didn't duck. He lunged across them, covering both of their bodies with his massive frame. Bullets began to rain down on the car. The armored glass spiderwebbed, but held. Thwack! 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 "They're blocking the rear," Marco yelled. "We're pinned!" Lorenzo couldn't hear the screaming or the explosions. He could only feel the concussive blasts rattling his teeth. He saw the fire. He saw the cracks in the glass. He knew what this was. A kill box. He grabbed Marco's shoulder and signed, "Drive through the railing." Marco looked at him terrified. The drop is 20 feet onto the lower service road. Lorenzo's eyes were black fire. "Do it!" Marco slammed on the gas. He jerked the wheel to the right. The heavy armored SUV smashed through the concrete barrier. Clara screamed as the world tilted. They were airborne. For a second, there was weightlessness, then a bone-jarring impact. The SUV slammed onto the lower road. The suspension groaned, metal screamed, but the car held together. They were alive. "Go," Lorenzo signed. Marco gunned the engine. They sped away beneath the bridge, leaving the attackers confused on the overpass above. But they weren't safe yet. A black sedan, the Rossi car, screeching out from a side tunnel, ramming into the side of their SUV. Glass shattered. The door on Lorenzo's side caved in. The SUV spun out, crashing into a concrete pillar. Clara's head hit the window. She was dazed, coughing in the dust and smoke. "Lily," she gasped. "Lily." Lily was crying, terrified but strapped safely in her car seat. The door on Lorenzo's side was ripped open. A man in a ski mask stood there, raising a machine pistol. It was Rick. Clara recognized his eyes. "Surprise, honey." Rick grinned, aiming at Clara. Lorenzo was slumped over, blood running down his forehead. He looked unconscious. "Say goodbye," Rick said. Suddenly, Lorenzo moved. He wasn't unconscious. He was waiting for the vibration of the door opening. As Rick pulled the trigger, Lorenzo jammed his own hand into the action of Rick's gun. The slide bit into Lorenzo's flesh, jamming the weapon, but saving Clara. Lorenzo didn't make a sound. He just snarled a silent, animalistic expression of rage. He grabbed Rick by the throat with his free hand. Rick gagged, dropping the gun, clawing at Lorenzo's arm. But Lorenzo's grip was hydraulic. He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch. Lorenzo tossed Rick aside like a rag doll. But as Lorenzo turned back to check on Clara, a second gunman appeared behind Rick's fallen body. He fired. Bang! Lorenzo jerked violently. A blossom of red exploded on his left shoulder. He fell back into the car, landing on Clara's lap. "Lorenzo!" Clara screamed. Marco was finally out of the front seat, returning fire, killing the second gunman. The area fell silent. Lorenzo looked up at Clara. His white shirt was soaking red rapidly. His eyes were losing focus. He reached up with a bloody hand. He touched Lily's foot. Then he looked at Clara. He signed his movements, sluggish and weak. Safe. Yes. Clara sobbed, pressing her hands against his wound to stop the bleeding. We're safe. Please don't die. You can't die. Lorenzo smiled faintly. His eyes rolled back. The silent king had fallen. The medical wing of the Moretti estate was a place where time seemed to die. It was located in the subterranean level of the mansion, a fully equipped trauma center that smelled of isopropyl alcohol, cold steel, and the metallic tang of dried blood. For 12 hours, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic, mechanical whoosh hiss of the ventilator breathing for Lorenzo Moretti. Clara sat in a hard plastic chair beside the bed, her body numb. She hadn't changed her clothes. The dress she had worn to the clinic was stiff with blood, Lorenzo's blood. It had dried into a dark, rusty map on her lap, a gruesome reminder of the body that had shielded her and Lily from the hail of bullets. She looked at him. The man who terrified Chicago looked small beneath the sterile white sheets. His chest, usually a wall of muscle, was wrapped in thick bandages. A drain tube ran from his side. His face was pale, the color of ash, making the jagged scar on his jaw stand out in stark, violent relief. He was in a medically induced coma to manage the swelling. The bullet had shattered his collarbone and torn through the subclavian artery. The surgeon, a nervous man named Dr. Aris, who was on the family payroll, had managed to sew him back together. But he had been blunt. The blood loss was catastrophic. His heart stopped twice on the table. Whether he wakes up, that is up to him. Lily was asleep in a portable crib in the corner, exhausted from crying. Clara stared at her daughter's rhythmic breathing, then back at Lorenzo's artificial breaths. He took a bullet for us. She thought the realization hitting her like a physical blow. He doesn't even know my middle name. But he died for us. The silence of the room was heavy, suffocating. For weeks, she had been terrified of Lorenzo's silence. Now she would give anything to see him tap a glass, stomp on the floor, or sign a command. The stillness of his hands was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. The heavy magnetic locks on the medical bay doors disengaged with a loud clack. Clara stiffened. Marco was standing guard inside the room, his left arm in a sling, his face bruised and swollen from the crash. He reached for his sidearm with his good hand. The double doors swung open. 3 men walked in. They didn't wear medical scrubs. They wore Italian silk suits that cost more than the clinic itself. The air in the room shifted instantly from sterile grief to predatory aggression. It was the capos, the 3 heads of the Hydra that Lorenzo controlled. First was Santino, the treasurer, a thin vulture-like man with rimless glasses and a ledger always in his mind. Second was Vinny the Hammer, a man whose neck was wider than his head, known for solving problems with a tire iron. Third was Paulie the Union liaison, a man who smiled too much and whose eyes never matched the expression. They ignored Marco. They didn't even look at Clara. They walked straight to the foot of the bed, staring down at their unconscious Don like butchers inspecting a side of beef. He looks bad, Santino said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Dr. Aris says brain function is minimal. He's a husk. He's fighting, Marco growled, stepping away from the wall. He's strong. Vinny scoffed a wet, ugly sound. He's done, Marco. Let's call it what it is. The Rossi family isn't waiting for a miracle. They hit the warehouses in the south side an hour ago, torched the inventory. They're moving on the docks tonight." "We fight back," Marco said, his hand hovering near his gun. "We hold the line until he wakes up." Paulie shook his head, checking his gold Rolex. "There is no we anymore. The streets smell blood. If the king doesn't roar, the hyenas eat the carcass. We received a courier from Don Rossi 30 minutes ago." Clara's fingers tightened around Lorenzo's limp hand. She felt a cold dread seep into her stomach. "Rossi is offering terms," Santino said, adjusting his glasses. "Generous terms considering we are leaderless. He wants the shipping routes, he wants the unions, and he wants the estate vacated by dawn. And us?" Marco asked, his eyes narrowing. "We live," Vinny said. "We get absorbed. We become Rossi captains. It's better than being dead in a ditch." "There is one more condition," Paulie added, his voice dropping an octave. He finally turned his head, his gaze landing on Clara with a sickening weight. "The girl," Paulie said. "And the kid." Clara stopped breathing. "What?" Marco stepped forward, placing his body between the capos and the chair. "Rossi was humiliated," Santino explained matter-of-factly. "Lorenzo stole his kill. Lorenzo insulted him by keeping the waitress. Rossi wants to send a message. He wants the woman and the bastard child delivered to him alive. He said he wants to finish his dinner." The room spun. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. They were discussing her life and Lily's life as if they were trading baseball cards. "You hand her over," Vinny said to Marco, "and we all walk away rich. You refuse, and Rossi burns this mansion to the ground with all of us inside. It's just a waitress, Marco." "She's nobody." Marco hesitated. Clara saw it. It was a fraction of a second, but she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was loyal to Lorenzo, yes. But Lorenzo was dying. Marco was a soldier. Soldiers followed orders, and soldiers wanted to survive. If she stayed silent, she died. If she begged, she died. Clara looked at Lorenzo's face one last time. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the library. "You are not the weakness. You are the reason I am going to war." She let go of his hand. She stood up. The sound of the chair scraping against the tile floor was sharp and jarring. The three capos looked at her surprised, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly moved on its own. "Sit down, sweetheart," Vinny sneered. "The men are talking." Clara didn't sit. She walked over to the bedside table. Lying there beside a beaker of water was Lorenzo's black leather notebook, the book he used to speak to the world. She picked it up. The leather was warm from where it had been sitting under the lamp. She turned to the men. She was shaking every nerve in her body, vibrating with terror. But she locked her knees to keep from collapsing. She forced herself to remember the cold, dead look in Lorenzo's eyes when he dealt with enemies. She channeled it. "Lorenzo knew," she said. Her voice was quiet, trembling slightly, but it gained strength with every word. "Knew what?" Santino frowned. "He knew Rossi would ambush the convoy." Clara lied. "He felt the vibration of the betrayal days ago. He told me the attack was coming." "Bullshit," Vinny spat. "If he knew, why did he drive into it? To draw Rossi out," Clara said quickly, her mind racing, inventing the narrative as she spoke. "To make Rossi think he won, so that Rossi would get careless." She held up the black notebook. "Before we left for the clinic," Clara said, "Lorenzo wrote his contingency plan. He knew he might be incapacitated. He left orders for the succession." The three men went rigid. In the Mafia, the written word of the Don was law even from the grave. Succession. Paulie laughed nervously. Who me Santino? Clara looked them in the eye, one by one. No. He knew you were weak. He knew you would try to sell us out the moment he fell. She opened the book. The page was covered in Lorenzo's sharp, angular handwriting notes about shipment weights and dinner orders, but she held it at an angle so they couldn't read it. He named a regent, Clara declared. Someone to hold the power until he wakes. Someone who isn't corrupted by greed. Who? Marco asked, his voice low. Clara closed the book with a snap. Me. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Vinny threw his head back and laughed a loud barking sound. You. Vinny wiped a tear from his eye. The dishwasher. You think you can run the Chicago outfit. You don't even know how to hold a gun. I don't need to hold a gun, Clara said, her voice icy. I hold the leverage. She took a step toward Vinny. He stopped laughing. The look in her eyes wasn't the look of a waitress. It was the look of a mother who had watched a wolf try to eat her child. I speak for him, Clara said. I'm the only one who knows the codes to the offshore accounts. I am the only one who knows where the blackmail files on the judges are kept. Lorenzo gave it all to me. It was a lie. A massive, dangerous lie. But these men were greedy, and greed made people paranoid. If you hand me over to Rossi, Clara said, the money disappears. The judges turn on you. The empire crumbles and you are left with nothing but a burning house. Santino looked at the notebook, sweating. He couldn't take the risk. If she was telling the truth, killing her would bankrupt them. So what is the plan? Boss, Santino asked, the word dripping with sarcasm and doubt. Rossi is waiting. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had bought herself minutes, maybe hours. Now she needed a move. Rossi thinks silence is weakness, Clara said, her mind flashing back to the library, Lorenzo feeling the thud of the paperweight, the vibration of the floor. He thinks because the lion is asleep, the house is quiet. She looked at Marco. Accept the meeting. Tell Rossi I will bring the surrender terms personally. Tonight, midnight. Where? Marco asked. The old foundry, Clara said. The foundry, Vinny interrupted. Are you stupid? That place is a metal box. It's an echo chamber. If a gun goes off in there, you'll go deaf. Clara's eyes widened. If a gun goes off, you go deaf. A memory sparked. Lorenzo showing her the high-frequency security system he had installed at the gate to deter dogs. The way he felt sound rather than heard it. The way sound could be a physical force. Exactly, Clara whispered. She turned to the capos. I am going to the foundry, and I am going to end the Rossi war. You three have a choice. You can stand behind me and keep your territory, or you can walk out that door, and Marco will put a bullet in the back of your heads for treason. She looked at Marco. It was the biggest gamble of her life. Right, Marco? Marco looked at the terrified woman standing tall in her blood-stained dress. He looked at the unconscious Don. He looked at the greedy capos. Marco drew his weapon. He didn't aim it at Clara. He aimed it at Vinny. Right, Marco said. The regent gave an order. Get moving. The capos cursed, but they backed down. They turned and marched out of the room to prepare the convoy. As soon as the door closed, Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed into the plastic chair, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. Marco holstered his gun and looked down at her. He didn't look at her like a waitress anymore. You better have a plan, Mrs. Miller, Marco said quietly, because if you walk into the foundry with nothing but a bluff, Rossi will skin us alive. Clara looked at the heart monitor. Beep, 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 a rhythm, a vibration. Lorenzo taught me that silence isn't empty," Clara whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It's heavy. Rossi relies on his ears. He likes the sound of his own voice too much." She looked up at Marco, her expression hardening into something jagged and dangerous. "We're going to scream at him, Marco," she said. "We're going to scream so loud it tears his world apart. Get me the industrial speakers from the warehouse, and get me everyone who knows how to keep their mouth shut." The industrial district was a graveyard of steel and iron. The foundry was a massive, cavernous building where they used to melt pig iron. It was full of catwalks, giant suspended vats, and hard surfaces that bounced sound around like bullets. Don Rossi arrived with 4 cars. He walked in with 10 men. He was a short, stout man, with a wheeze and an ego the size of Chicago. He wore a white coat, expecting a coronation. Clara stood in the center of the factory floor. She was alone. She wore a black dress she had found in Lorenzo's guest wardrobe. Her hair was pulled back tight. She looked small against the towering machinery. Rossi laughed as he approached. His voice boomed in the echo chamber. "Look at this," Rossi sneered, spreading his arms. "The waitress. The lion is asleep, so he sends the mouse." Clara didn't speak. She held her hands clasped in front of her. "Where is the surrender?" Rossi demanded. "Where are the deeds to the docks? Where is the cash?" Clara reached into her pocket. Rossi's men raised their guns. She pulled out a small remote. "What is that?" Rossi asked. "A bomb." "You don't have the guts." "No bomb," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "Just an adjustment." "You're wasting my time," Rossi growled, stepping closer. "I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to go to that house, put a pillow over Moretti's face and take the kid. She'll fetch a good price." Clara's eyes darkened. "You will never touch her." "Who's going to stop me?" Rossi shouted. "I am the loudest voice in this city." Clara pressed the button. She hadn't rigged explosives. She had rigged the foundry's old emergency ventilation sirens and the industrial testing speakers Marco had scavenged. Screek! The sound wasn't just loud. It was a weapon. A high-frequency feedback loop, amplified to 160 decibels, blasted from the rafters. It was a sonic cannon. Rossi and his men screamed, dropping their guns to clutch their ears. The sound was disorienting, nauseating. It vibrated the fluid in their inner ears, destroying their balance. They fell to their knees, vomiting and writhing in agony. Clara stood still. She was wearing high-fidelity earplugs hidden by her hair. She felt the vibration in her chest rattling her ribs. But she could stand. From the shadows of the catwalks, Marco and the loyal Moretti guards emerged. They wore heavy-duty earmuffs. They didn't need to shoot. Rossi's men were incapacitated by the sheer acoustic violence. Marco walked up to Rossi, who was curled in a fetal position, blood trickling from his ears. Marco kicked the gun away from Rossi's hand. Clara pressed the button again. The silence that followed was instant and deafening. Rossi gasped for air, his equilibrium gone. He looked up at Clara with terror. What are you?" "I'm the silence," Clara whispered. Marco raised his gun to finish it. "Wait." The voice came from the entrance. It was rough, unused, like gravel grinding together. Clara spun around. Lorenzo. He was in a wheelchair, pushed by one of the doctors. He was pale as a sheet, an IV bag hanging from the chair bandages, covering his chest. But his eyes were open, and he was awake. He had woken up when the vibration of the sirens shook the hospital bed miles away. Numb. He had woken up because he felt the absence of Clara. He signaled to the doctor to stop. He looked at Rossi. Lorenzo didn't have his gun. He didn't need it. He looked at Marco. He signed one distinct motion. Flash. Marco nodded. He tossed a heavy 9mm pistol to Clara. Clara caught it. The weight was heavy in her hand. Lorenzo looked at her. He didn't sign shoot. He signed your choice. Rossi looked at Clara. You can't. You're just a girl. You're a mother. Yes, Clara said, tears filling her eyes as she thought of Lily in the crib and the man in the wheelchair who had taken a bullet for them. I am a mother, and that is why you have to go. Bang. One shot. Clean. The end of the Rossi war. Clara dropped the gun. She ran to the wheelchair. She fell to her knees, burying her face in Lorenzo's lap, sobbing. Lorenzo winced from the pain, but he reached down. His hand, weak and shaking, stroked her hair. He felt her sobs against his legs. He looked at Marco and signed. Take us home. 6 months later. Lavelle's was open again, but tonight it wasn't empty. It was full. The staff was relaxed. There was music playing soft jazz. At table 1, Lorenzo sat. He looked healthier, though his left arm was still stiff. He was reading a menu. Across from him sat Clara. She looked radiant, wearing diamonds that matched the ring on her finger. And in a high chair between them sat Lily, now 2 years old. Lily was banging a spoon against her bowl. Clang, clang, clang. The old Lorenzo would have cleared the restaurant. The old Lorenzo would have seen it as chaos. But Lorenzo Moretti just watched the spoon. He felt the sharp vibration in the table leg. He looked at Lily. He winked. He reached out, grabbed his fork, and tapped his glass. Ting, ting. Lily laughed and hit the bowl again. Clara reached over and placed her hand over Lorenzo's. He looked at her. I love you, she said, signing the words as she spoke them. Lorenzo smiled a real smile that reached his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. The silent king was no longer alone, and for the first time in his life, he didn't mind the noise. And that is the incredible story of Lorenzo and Clara. From a terrified waitress hiding a baby in a pantry to the queen of the Chicago underworld, Clara proved that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't speak. Lorenzo thought his silence was his armor, but it was actually his prison until a baby's messy hands broke the lock. It makes you wonder if you were in Clara's shoes. Could you have pulled the trigger to protect your family? Or if you were, Lorenzo, could you trust the person who brought chaos into your perfect order? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next one.